So that's kind of what our podcast calls ours, community calls, but it's like almost like a town hall where we have a guest and the guest that we speak to. Today it's you, Stephen. Brings up a lot of stuff, so we do like a conversation, and as I was sharing with you before, afterwards we have the community chime in, and if there's we just have a living room discussion is what it ends up feeling like oftentimes, which I love so much. And I'm just glad that you're able to join us today, and I'm excited to hear about your story and yeah, introduce you to the Conscious Rebels community.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited about it. I really enjoy these conversations. I've done a number of lives. I was on the radio the other day, and just having these natural conversations just flow and just letting them go where they need to go. And
Yeah.
it kind of hits us all in where we need it most.
Yeah, I love it. I love just allowing what to happen in the moment and see where it goes. And I have, from our email conversation, kind of an idea of what I want to ask you. But the first thing
Mhm.
that popped into my mind to ask you is the Stephen that we're getting to meet today the same Stephen from a decade or two ago?
Absolutely not. Like, thus the name of my book, From A-hole to All Right, you know? So
Uh-huh.
I was a very highly narcissistic guy who was not in touch with his emotions. I was a far right evangelical conservative, Christian. And so I deconstructed everything around religion, politics, parenting, relationships. And I am now a much more conscious human being.
That's so interesting. So when you say far right evangelical Christian, um, even though I came from evangelical Christianity, I never would have considered myself far right, MAGA, whatever. MAGA didn't exist, I guess, when I was in evangelical Christianity. Tell us about the stuff you believed. Like, let's talk about before, Stephen,
Before
to
who I
set,
am now.
yeah, to set the stage. Yeah, let's set the stage for like who you were before, because then we can talk about like the whole journey.
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to the story, and a lot of it, I think it's really important context is that a lot of our beliefs are shaped early on by our early traumas and the society and the folks we hang around with when we're growing up. But Stephen, before, from a religious standpoint, I was born and raised Catholic in New York City. I grew up around a lot of Italian Americans. A lot of Italian Americans think, yeah, we're better than everyone else. So I grew up with unhealthy beliefs around race and identity and sexual identity and preference. Very unhealthy conditioning early on. So after I left and joined the military at the age of 18, I met my first wife, and I was often in a lot of emotional pain, but I didn't know where it was coming from. And the first thing I was looking for was a savior from my pain. So I fell right into, I ended up in Virginia from the military, and right here we are in the Bible Belt. And so um,
It's only a matter of time, Stephen. They were gonna get you.
they got me. They got me, and the way they got me was very interesting because I don't know if you remember Amway or
Yeah,
Quickstore, the multi-level marketing cult.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was me, and that's how naive I was. And I got sucked into what they called at the time was Quick Star, which was they were trying to cover up the whole Amway thing. And I started going to these meetings, and then after the meetings, they'd be like, "Come on, let's go out and get a bite to eat at this place." I'm like, "Yes, that sounds cool." So we end up, being in this like really like late night restaurant, and there's like they have the whole back room, like just for people in this group. And then people just started praying and, saying testimonies. And I'm not gonna lie, the first time I saw it, I'm like, this is weird. This is weird. But then, like, one person would come talk to me about religion, and another person would talk to me about my growing up as a Italian Catholic in New York and how we don't pray to Mary. That's you don't do that. And so I was like, I was so lost about who I was as a human being that I was so easily manipulated and controlled. And it was hard to admit that for a long time because I spent many years that way. but that's where it started. I started reading the Bible, and I started um, going to all these different denominations. I started out strong. I went straight to Pentecostal where they're running up and down the aisles and speaking in tongues. And I'm like, this is weird. This is not what I'm used to, but okay. Like, this must be something that I need to be a little more curious about. So,
Yeah. What was it like encountering Jesus in that way and juxtaposed to your Catholic upbringing? I almost think of Catholicism like a culture and not so much a religion, even though it very much is. But it's like so many people that come from a Catholic background have never really read the Bible. And it's totally different than evangelicalism, in my opinion. What are your thoughts on that?
completely different because, as I grew up, I was an altar boy. I grew up around the time when the big scandal came out about priests molesting boys. And I had to spend some time wondering if I had been molested because I don't know. But I was that traumatized that I did not know, and I would not. Sometimes the body dissociates from something really traumatic. So I didn't know. All I know is that I was an altar boy. I spent a lot of time around priests, but we were not encouraged to read the Bible. And then when I became an evangelical Christian in, I think, the mid 90s, they were like, oh, you got to read your Bible. You got to get it in you. And I'm like, okay. Started going to all these Bible studies and I'm reading the Bible. I'm like, I don't know what this means, but okay. And then I would go to all these different denominations and they would tell me what it meant. And then they would tell me about hell and that's where I'm going if I didn't accept Jesus. So it was scary. I was like, oh my God, this hell thing is real. Like I heard about it growing up, but then it started to really get pummeled into my brain. So I had a lot of fear, and that fear is what began to start controlling my decisions.
And you don't even realize it, and it didn't even cross my mind oftentimes growing up in the church because I mean I started going when I was 13, so many of us are just conditioned to believe that the people older than us have all the answers and that they're the authority figures and it's all there. And it never crossed my mind that when they were telling me what it meant that they could be wrong. Until I got older and I was like, wait a second, Jesus was not talking literally about any of this stuff. And it's like, why are we taking all of this literally when it very clearly wasn't? And he spoke in metaphor and parable all the time. So
Mhm.
at what point, which I guess which denomination did you end up settling in and how much time did you spend in it?
All of them.
All of them.
No,
Okay.
really, I went the gamut, for the most part. I think I did almost every denomination of Christianity there is. But I settled on non-denominational, which is a denomination. And a lot of times when you look at branding of these churches nowadays, they don't put up we're a Baptist organization. They have these new things, these more modern I don't know if I would say titles or whatever, but it's like AtlanticShores.org like is on their church now instead of a Baptist church. Or this one church that is nearby me, it's called River Oak. What does that mean? What are you associated with? And so I started getting a little smarter as I was starting to wake up about 10 years ago. I started looking like, who are they a part of? And then I found out they were part of the Southern Baptist Convention. So it's very almost insidious of how they package and brand themselves as non-denominational and say they're non-denominational, but in fact, a lot of times they are tied to a denomination. And it's very manipulative. But that was part of what I went through and part of what helped me to wake up. But this wasn't an overnight thing for me. This was like
Yeah.
the last, to give you a little bit of context of how traumatized I was. Back in May 23rd, 2015, I nearly died in a motorcycle accident. Traumatic brain injury, broke every bone in my face, screws, plate in my face. So my daughter was 8 days old at the time. Okay. Um,
Wow.
just to give you some context, I was a mess. I was really overweight. I was looking for validation from any woman that would give it to me because I wasn't getting it in my own marriage, at the time. I was such an a-hole. And then 2016, I was ready to end it all. I had a very close call with suicide, and ended up in the VA hospital for a week. And thanks to the psychiatrist who pumped me with more psychiatric medications because that's the way to fix trauma, right? And I say that, very sarcastically, but was a guinea pig for Big Pharma. I think
Yeah,
I've been on every mood disorder medication there is. And again, a lot of it was just unresolved trauma, but you don't know that until you know it, and that's
yeah.
that's the hard part.
Yeah, I feel really grateful. It sounds like you're in the same position that we don't feel like we're victims of those systems. I, in a way, feel like we were Trojan horses. We got put into those systems to see them from the inside and then be able to escape the system, to expose it, to help others who are in similar conditions. Because in so many ways, the mental health system and psychiatry industries are just another belief system, and people are leaving Christianity and going straight into the arms of what they think is science when it's actually not science and it's just a belief system of what they think these mental health symptoms are caused by, and we're not getting to the root cause, which so much of it, from my experience, from your experience, so many people have experienced this almost like a PTSD after leaving Christianity. And I didn't even know that's what it was. I was also suicidal for 2.5 years. I was Googling hell incessantly, trying to figure out whether it was real or not. And just in this OCD like spiral of religious persecution, paranoia, like just if I hadn't had the doctrine slammed into me as much as I had about hell and, Jesus dying for my sins and me being a wretched sinner undeserving of God's grace, like I probably wouldn't have gone through what I went through. I didn't know it was, my a faith crisis at the time, but I think it's so important that we talk about these things because so many people are going through it and they're getting labeled and they're getting pathologized instead of understood. And I think what the work you're doing is so important, and being willing to share your story on the other side of it is important as well. So all in all, how long were you, when did you get into like you said far right um conservatism? Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means and what that looked like in your life?
Yeah, and this is the one that sometimes it's not difficult to own. I own it, but a lot of conservatism is wrapped around a lot of, Christian values, right? And for a long time, I was really getting tired of your typical politicians. Again, 2015 was the motorcycle accident, and 2016 was my near suicide attempt. But guess who took office in 2016? Donald Trump.
Hmm.
And the thing about Donald Trump at the time is I watched The Apprentice. I was like, oh, and I was a business, man at the time. I was like, oh, I like the way he's conducting. The show was like addictive to me at the time. But I wasn't as aware of his background as I was until I became aware of his background. So, I started falling into everything that was Trump and MAGA at the time, and I was like, yeah, this has got to be the way. He's so raw, and I just didn't recognize the cruelty of who he was at the time. And then in 2020 came, and then the insurrection came. Um, it was right around that time that I really stepped away from politics, and that is when I really dove into trauma-informed therapy. So it really, like, I was in therapy, and a lot of it was talk therapy from 2015 to right around 2020. And I was like, I am not getting any better. So that was when I really started to dive into trauma and really started to bring back the parts of myself I abandoned in childhood, like kindness
Hmm.
and feeling and grieving and being a human being, being in touch with my emotions as a man and letting go of that alpha male image that so many men put up to try to look strong. But a lot of times underneath that, it is really, I don't want to say weak, but a lot of times for me, it was even a mask to cover up my own insecurities. So,
Hmm.
but yeah, I started questioning, and now I'm connected with a group called leavingmaga.org, and Rich Lowe just started that, and I help people become aware of the far right movement. And so I'm one of his leaders in his organization, And we're doing videos, and we have a video we did on the Midas Touch Network about a month ago, and that's gotten over like 250,000 views. So we're doing the work, and we're trying to reach people, and we're not here to shame people for not being aware of what they've been a part of, because you don't shame someone out of a cult. You don't shame someone out of, you love someone, you show compassion and understanding, and you walk with them instead of shaming them. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of context of my political journey, because oftentimes it's rooted in trauma and ideology.
Yeah, I mean, that's how they keep us divided against each other too. I think it's important to recognize that I think both sides, especially if you're far anything and you're not seeing that it's the same bird, both wings are on the same bird, it's like people on the far right are like the far left is on a cult, and the people on the far left are like the far right's in a cult. Like the whole thing is a cult. The whole That's what Conscious Rebels was kind of founded on, was we kind of all realized that the political game is a show, it's a sham to keep us looking at each other and fighting against each other instead of joining together and realizing that the people above us that are literally trying to keep us down, keep us dumb, keep us I mean, you could talk about how the psychiatric industry plays into that and how it's getting so much funding because it's like, oh, we're trying to control people, keep people from waking up. And we're finding out that these psychiatric medications are disconnecting people from themselves even more. That religion is disconnecting people from themselves because they're told that the answers lie outside of them, and that looking within and meditating is dangerous. And it's like that's Jesus was telling us to go into the upper rooms. Jesus was telling us to that the kingdom of God was within us, that the kingdom of heaven was within us. And of course, that's all demonic, and you're gonna encounter demons if you meditate. It's like that's the only way you're gonna meet God is when you go within, because God dwells within you. And that silence is you creating space to be able to hear the spirit speak to you. And it's insane how much both sides of Christianity and psychiatry are mm, keeping us disconnected, and politics is no different. It's all a belief system that is designed to control people and to control the narrative and to accomplish a goal of one, the people in power staying in power ultimately. When we forget that we have power, when we're told that we don't have power, that we get to vote for the people who have power, it's like that's my goal with having people like you on, Stephen, and having gatherings like this so we can make sure that we stay sane in an insane world, right? Because so
Yeah.
much of these experiences that we've had and these symptoms that get pathologized are just normal responses to a completely insane world.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's what it's about, is like, we try to put a label that, there's something wrong with you, or a diagnosis. It's like, no, that's complex trauma, for a lot of us, I just turned 50 this past August, and I grew up with boomers, so at that time, I mean, like, they didn't have the parenting skills then that we're starting to develop now. The research then, also getting help was non-existent. You just sucked it up, So that's one of the things that's becoming more and more normalized. And I'm trying to support people and letting them know that's okay to get help, So that's really part of the work that I do. And I try to normalize getting help, that it's okay, especially, for men. It's not all men. I mean, I don't want to make it a gender issue, but a lot of men typically try to avoid um, reaching out for help because that was often weakness.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And it's like it's awesome that there's people like you out there too that are helping people in a more conscious way than there's a lot of times when people hear get help, they think of going to the mental hospital or like going and talking to a psychiatrist who's just going to diagnose them with a mental illness and then give them a pill. Like that's what's considered help. And so often it's the first line of treatment for people. And if like medication and talk therapy with a psychiatrist who really isn't trauma informed, who really isn't informed at all about religious crisis or faith crisis, when you're uh everything you thought you knew about life and what you thought was real, like this whole doctrine of Jesus dying for your sins, like when you're in it, you're like, yeah, of course that's true, because if I don't believe it, I'm going to hell. But then when you step out of it, you realize so much of your life was a lie, and that wasn't what Jesus was here to do at all. Like he was very clearly murdered for trying to show people that the way to God was not outside of them, was actually within them. And going through that, and I genuinely believe that that is the wailing and gnashing of teeth that the book of Revelation talks about, is when people have that awakening and it's sudden, it's like in the blink of an eye, and the wailing and gnashing of teeth is realizing that everything you thought you knew about life and yourself is a complete lie. And the psychological torment that comes along with having to reckon with that is just going to be a rude awakening in every aspect of the word. And that I also believe is what judgment is. I think there's a lot of people who think that God is going to judge them, but the reality is that the judgment comes through oneself, and the sin, the ignorance has its own built-in consequences of simply being unaware. And it's not something that they're going to be tormented for forever, because there is a healing that comes through that. You have to know better in order to do better. And yeah, so I'm curious for you, when you started to know better, what that experience was like. You said it was not an overnight thing, not a gradual thing, but like I'm kind of imagining you like, was there a turning point when you were deep in the evangelicalism, deep in the far right conservatism, where you're like, maybe this isn't right? Do you remember anything like that?
Yeah, for me it was very specific. So, it's not just religion for me. Like it's what for me it was finally waking up to all of the patterns at once. It was slow and then all at once. And for me, I was going to my third marriage, and we were evangelical Christians, and we would have conversations about the Bible. And like, I started to get these anxieties about my relationship and these fears and stuff like that. So that pattern started to come up in me. And then we would have some conversations that I didn't necessarily believe things to be as literal as some people, And so, we started having a conversation. I was like, I don't really know if that's really meant to be taken literal, or, and then there was a lot of people that we were hanging around that really, I'm like, not her necessarily, but people I was around, I'm like, this doesn't really feel like Jesus. This feels pretty toxic. But I wasn't pointing the finger at anyone. There was one day where I was just in so much, pain. Every day I felt like I wanted to die. I didn't want to wake up. And I'm like, what is going on here? And for some reason, the question popped in my mind. I'm like, it was, what is shame? I've heard the word shame so many times. I'm like, I'm going to dive in. I really want to understand what shame is. And so I looked up a YouTube video at the time by a guy named Tim Fletcher, and he's a Canadian guy. He is a Christian, but he started talking about complex trauma and what shame is. And he started going down the rabbit hole and describing all of the ways that shame manifests in someone. And this is when I started looking at myself and I wanted to vomit. Literally looking at myself as clearly like he was holding up a mirror to who I was and all the things I was doing. It made me so sick to my stomach. And my first thing was like, oh my God, I'm a narcissist, you know? And then that was when I was like, okay, this is bad. Like, so that was the beginning of my awakening. And that was right around 2020, 2021, like right in that time frame. I'm married. I have another kid on the way. Right now I'm 50. I have a 4.5-year-old son. It's been crazy. My father was beginning to die. I was having problems with my other ex-wife. I'm talking about like, I don't know how I made it through that time. It was the most challenging awakening, being hit from so many different angles of pain and grief. And then sitting one day with my counselor, and I'm talking about my childhood. I'm talking about the stuff with the religion. I'm so confused. And he just stops me there. He's like, Stephen, he's like, just stay with me. And he lowered his voice. I'm like, what are you doing? This is weird. In my head, I'm like, what are you doing? But what he was doing was creating this safe place that I never experienced with another man before. And he created it, and he was very calm. And all of a sudden, all of the tears started. I mean, like I was bawling, and he just let me cry. And he's like, Stephen, he's like, this is the beginning really of your healing journey. He's like, you're starting to feel what you wouldn't allow yourself to feel. And I'm like, oh my God, this is hard. You know? And then for like the next year, I cried almost every day, like incessantly. There was so much pent-up grief from all the years. And that was truly the beginning of my awakening to myself, and also along the lines of awakening to questioning everything else, which included religion. So hopefully it
So
gives you a little bit of, I mean, I'm trying to shape it so you understand the journey, that it's a lot of it's intertwined with everything else in my life.
yeah. When you say you were having all of this grief, can you put it into words what specifically you were grieving?
Specifically, what I was grieving was the childhood I wished I had.
Mm,
And when I sat back and started to realize for the longest time, I was like, oh, everybody has a childhood like mine. Okay, so I grew up in
yeah.
New York, Italian American. I grew up around mobsters, you know. I grew up, like I went to, this isn't going to be repeated, is it? Like, I don't know if you're recording. It might be. I'm going to leave it at that. So I don't want to get too deep into what I was about to say, but I grew up around a lot of tough guys, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is normal. And then I remember talking to my psychologist therapist in the VA, and I started telling her all the things I had been exposed to, and she's like, that's not really normal. You know,
Yeah.
that's pretty intense. It's like what you went through, not everyone goes through. And then I started to question, I'm like, I thought everyone had a life like this. And then I started to realize that that's just not the case. And that's when I
Hmm.
started to question, I'm like, what was my life really like? And I want to be fair to my parents, like they did the best they could. We grew up in a culture, where my dad was dyslexic. He didn't have good writing school skills or reading skills, and my mom was actually and is extremely intelligent, and she has a master's degree in education. But the dynamic growing up at home, my dad could be very verbally, emotionally, and physically abusive, and my mom and her own traumas, she was neglectful. She didn't know how to stand up for me. So it also created a wound in me like I didn't matter and that no
Mm.
one would protect me. And I was always looking for someone to protect me throughout my life, whether that be in a relationship or whether that be with Jesus or wherever it was, I was looking for someone to protect me and save me. And I didn't realize the only one who could do that was me.
Yeah. It's crazy because in the church we hear you can't save yourself. And basically we're taught to reject ourselves, that we can't trust ourselves, that our heart's desires are evil, and to come to the conclusion that I had followed my heart's desires for most of my life, and that's why I felt guilty, and that I didn't need to feel guilty because the whole reason you have desires is because you're supposed to do those things. And I'm not talking about like carnal desires or lust or anything like that, but of like exploring the world, being free. I didn't even know that I could do what I'm doing now, and podcasting and having an online community and just being able to connect with people. And as technology didn't exist, I was a 90s kid, right? And technology didn't exist the way it does now, and I didn't know it was possible, but I dreamt of it in a way, just being able to, I used to walk around on the beach with a fake microphone from McDonald's and pretend like I was interviewing people. And I was like 5 years old, and I had no problems just talking to strangers, and in
Fantastic.
a way that can kind of get conditioned out of us when we're told that unless you're going to be going on a mission trip, unless you're living your life in the ministry, and had no idea when we went to church camp and different conferences and stuff that there was a lot of people there that were trying to recruit people for their colleges, to make money for their colleges, and to go on the missions trips and to expand their organizations. I had no idea that it wasn't actually what God wanted. And so when I rejected that and started to do more of my own thing, I felt a lot of guilt and shame for that. And it's so freeing to know that nope, you were feeling your instinct and you just couldn't make yourself do the thing that you saw your friends doing. And still doesn't make sense why I guess I felt like I was a bad Christian for a long time because I saw my friends like wanting to go on these mission trips and like win people for Jesus. And I'm like, why don't I want that? Like there's something wrong with me for not wanting that, but there was never actually anything wrong at all. And it'll be interesting to see. I don't have conversations with those people anymore, but um definitely thought that there's something wrong with me because I wasn't doing what everybody else was doing. And yeah, so now that you are on the other side of it and you have healing roots on up now, you're working with people. What has that been like? Have you been able to connect with a lot of people that have maybe in the military? Oh, that's what I want to ask actually. How so you were in the Navy, is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely noticed that my dad was in the Navy as well. And so I've noticed that joining the military and being part of like serving your country that has changed over the years. And we talk about this a lot in Conscious Rebels actually, that war is very profitable and it's very obvious that people are going to war to make money for for other people instead of to actually protect freedom. So I'm curious if that was has also been a part of your awakening too, that what it means to serve is not necessarily what they tell you it is, and how that's affected your awakening at all, if any.
Yeah, no, it has. Part of also my idea of the military, and I'm still proud that I served, and I am and just to give a little bit of context around Healing Roots on up, I don't do this for money. I've invested my own money. So like this is not a business for me. I don't need to work. So this is kind of what I do as my way of giving back from my own insights from therapy, self-reflection, and conscious change.
Likewise.
Yeah, so I don't it's the money is not I don't need it and I'm okay as a disabled veteran. But for the longest time, I was like, especially when I was more right leaning, I was like, war is good. We're here. We're doing the work. We're. And then I started, learning more about the military industrial complex and how wealthy people get. And I am
Oh my
around
God.
all kinds of contractors here in Virginia, all kinds of military folks that really do really well when we're at war. And the people that do the best oftentimes are the 1% that are making billions and billions of dollars. So when I started to understand that, and even going into Iran and going into Venezuela, and you start to look beyond of why we're there, why they say we're there, I'm like, okay, what is it that we have to gain by going into Venezuela? What is it that they have? And then you look at their oil supply. Now, I'm not saying that is absolutely the only reason to, but you start to scratch your head and you start to think to
Yeah.
yourself, why are we now in Iran? What resource do they have? You know, what are we diverting? What are we distracting from? The Epstein files are heating up, and I don't want to get stuck in one thing. And that is the one thing that I've learned is I try my best to not be an extremist either direction because I was a far right extremist at one time. And when I'm deconstructing, a lot of times we want to swing the opposite way. So for a while, I started to get really far left. And then I'm like, all right, now I'm coming back to center. This is the place to be, and this is where the healthiest place is to be is in order to view both sides objectively. But going to war right now and understanding some of the motivations behind going to war is sometimes a lot more sinister than it appears to be, and the talking points that come out from the news stations. So learning to look at where you're getting your news. I used to be a huge Fox News fan. Huge. Bill O'Reilly, that was one thing me and my dad connected on back in the past. And then when I stopped watching Fox News, I was like, I'm starting to feel a little bit better. I'm not as angry, you know. And then, so then I went from there and then I started looking at the other news networks and I'm like, all right, even with this stuff, I'm like, you have to be careful with what you're consuming. There's other ones out there that are pretty good. I like ground news, which is a good aggregate that shows you which direction and bias that they're leaning towards.
Yeah.
Because I started to question everything. I even want to question the fact checkers out there. I'm like, is there a bias behind fact checkers? You know, um, but it also ties in when I'm talking about relating to going outside of what we already know. When I was deconstructing from religion, and I remember being in a small group Bible study, and I was the one that was like real as shit. Okay, excuse my language, but I'm like, where was God when I was getting my ass beat in as a kid? Where was, and then I'd say, I want to go look at some other religions. I want to see what Buddhism has to say. And I remember everyone jumping up in a panic, like, don't do that. If you go out there, that's so dangerous. And I'm like, that's even more of a reason. Don't tell me not to do something. And so I've gone as far, and this has been a wonderful experience for me. And I've gone as far as trying to have a good overview of all the religions that there are. And I find a lot of commonality spoken in different languages, you
Yeah.
know? So that was where I started to become less of attachment to the God of the Christian Bible is also the God of, you know, Buddhism more of a philosophy, but the Hindu Krishna and the Abrahamic religions. Like this is, if you want to call it anything, it's the God, source or spirit of all.
Yeah. It's the same path or many songs. There's a meme I'm thinking of that shows Jesus and Krishna and Buddha and like the same different lyrics or same song or something. I can't remember exactly what it is, but what came to mind when you were describing being in this Bible study and talking about wanting to go and experience other religions and what they said. I'm like, oh, if you go out there, like when you said out there, I was like, it's Plato's cave, like they're watching shadows on the wall and somebody breaks free, so Steven breaks free and he wants to go and explore and it's like right before you actually exit the cave and discover this whole new world reality. And you haven't even gotten to that point of wanting to go and tell them about it, but did you ever have any experiences of when you tried to go back to those people that you're in Bible study with and talk to them about what you discovered?
Well, that's yeah, good question. I kind of left that Bible study after that. I was like,
Yeah.
I'm like, I was so vulnerable at the time, and one thing I've learned is vulnerability is a superpower if
Yeah.
shared in the right places, in safe places. It's not always depends on who's receiving it. But what I did because I was often looked to from other pastors at the time, they liked to talk to me. They knew I was going through something, and I would occasionally meet with a couple different pastors for breakfast or for coffee, and I would try to share some of my insights. And I said, listen, I'm willing to meet with you for coffee as long as you're trying not to, if as long as you're not trying to convert me and make me stay a Christian. I'd be happy to meet with you. And then eventually at one point I was thinking maybe I need to stay a Christian and stay in the church so I can help people become aware that this isn't healthy. And this was also part of my deconstruction. And then I was like, no, that's kind of codependent. I was like, I don't need to rescue anyone. I said, what I
That's
need
right.
to do is start letting go of the need to rescue anyone and then just choose a community of
Yeah.
folks that are more aligned with who I am today than who I was back then. And that's what slowly happened. And
Yeah.
that's what I have a whole new circle. My inner circle looks nothing like my previous one. And that's
Yeah.
also part of the grieving process.
It's life-giving when we detach from this expectation of having to do and simply focus on being. We have a program in here. It's called Transform that a lot of folks in here have gone through. I used to teach it live, but now we're doing this instead. So we have a bunch of the pre-recorded ones, but we talk about in there if you focus on who you're being, then the doing kind of takes care of itself because it's like a natural byproduct of who you're being is what you do. So it's such a relief to not feel, I mean, detangling from the programming is a whole nother beast, but this programming of having to perform and I was an overachiever as a kid and I was used to having like, okay, if you follow this, you're gonna get the good result. And it's deconstructing all of that is still happening, I think is a lifelong process, especially for those of us who grew up in it. And getting away from this idea that you have to perform in order to be accepted, even if that performance is simply what you believe, right? All you have to do is believe the right way. And it's like that's not easy because of what you're being told to believe makes absolutely no sense. You can't force yourself to believe it, and then you're going to be punished for all eternity for what you were unable to do because it made no sense. It makes no sense. And so yeah, it's such a journey, and Jesus told us, that we're meant to be the light of the world, and a light just stands there. A light is just there. And we're way showers, and reconditioning ourselves to live our lives by example and to let that energy just be and to let it do its job. Just because we're not doing anything doesn't mean nothing is happening. And having to hammer that into my head and know that the universe is conspiring in our favor and the energy is all around us whether or not we can see it. And so many of us are told, like, I think we talked about in here, science, and we talked about psychiatry, right? Science itself is a belief system, and there's so much that we can't see that's not technically science because it's not observable, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And so I love being able to bring in elements of the metaphysical and understanding that, I mean, everybody believes in love, but you can't measure it, you can't see it, but we're all believing in it, right? So does that mean that it's all just delusional? It's all just chemicals in our brain that are convincing us that love is real, this connection that so many of us, even in this room, feel with each other, like we're all kind of meant to be here and we're all meant to find each other in some way. And that's why I like to have these discussions. And we're kind of moving into the Q&A portion, but I want, so everything we've said so far is going to be public facing, but this is a safe space. So as we move into that um, portion of I guess, our programming here today, I want to open it up to the Conscious Rebels Network. This is the room that we're in right now. And so if you're listening to this and you're not in the Conscious Rebels Network and you want to be in the Conscious Rebels Network, check it out, consciousrebelsnetwork.com. It is a safe place for people who have deconstructed from politics, religion, all the systems that keep us under control using fear and shame. And it's not just religion, as many of us have found out. And it's been so cool to introduce you to the community, Stephen. And I'm just so grateful that you're here today.